Tom Brady finally speaks to the media following practice on Monday. Carlton Davis has some lofty expectations of himself as well as the defense, and the Bucs are officially back in pads. Let's go.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome to the Locked On Bucs Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We are your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And we thank you for making us your first listen or view of the day. I am James Yarcho, joined by David Harrison. You can check out all of David's work over at Sports Illustrated's BucsGameDay.com. Check out mine at SB Nation's BucsNation.com, and follow along on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs, and at DHarrison82.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast your first view or listen of the day. Quarterback Tom Brady finally spoke with the media on Monday following training camp practice, and he had some encouraging things to say. Some good news coming out of Tampa on Monday afternoon. Brady was asked about his thoughts on Robert Hainsey, who is filling in for the injured Ryan Jensen, and Brady said, quote, "He's worked really hard. Obviously, everyone's heartbroken with what happened to Ryan, so that'll take a little time, but Haynes has to step into the job and do a great job. He's worked hard last year, really gained the trust with a lot of people, and has to go earn it. Like all of us, it's not what you did or how hard you worked in the offseason. It's how good of a football player are you. It's to be determined for all of us," end quote. James, we know the Bucs expect a more definitive answer to the Jensen question in the coming days, something that I actually have a theory on after they ran some more tests. But are you encouraged by the conversation surrounding Hainsey from people like the Draft Network's Carmen Vitale, AQ Shipley, and now Tom Brady?
I think I am. And this is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show. Things changed on Monday as far as practice is concerned because they started wearing the pads. You start to have actual contact. So we're going to start to be able to gauge a little bit of where Robert Hainsey actually is. Then you're going to get an even bigger test coming up in about 2 weeks when they practice, against the Dolphins, but then have the preseason game against the Miami Dolphins coming up in, what is that? It's like 12 days. So that's really where you're going to start to see where Hainsey falls in line. And obviously Brady's hoping that he does well, but he's also not exactly crowning him. He even says, it's how good of a football player are you? And that's TBD for all of us. Not really, because we know Tom Brady's a great football player. We know Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, Devin White, Levante David. We know there are plenty of guys on this team that are great football players, but how good is this guy going to be? It's going to take time to figure out. And the longer the Buccaneers go without signing somebody that could compete for that job, like we've mentioned JC Tretter numerous times on the show now, the more confident I'm getting in Hainsey's ability to step in and be the starting center this year.
Yeah, and absolutely. And here's kind of my little conspiracy theory on the whole Ryan Jensen thing, right? So because some people are confused that, they ran all the tests, they did this series of tests and all that stuff. Why do they not have a definitive answer, right? And we kind of talked about this before, right? Like swelling sometimes can mess with machines and readings and all that. And there's other factors to things. But also potentially, and this is pure conspiracy on my part, no inside information or confirmation of anything, but the Buccaneers don't have to report full injuries right now. Like there's no injury list requirement. I mean, stuff like that. But so let's say the Buccaneers are potentially looking at a veteran option. They're not the only NFL team that has center questions, right? Like there's other NFL teams out there that could have questions at similar positions, and they're potentially looking at some of these veteran options like JC Tretter. So if the Buccaneers let it be known publicly that, Ryan Jensen has a torn ACL, he's out for the season, yada, 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 all of a sudden, I don't even know, the Pittsburgh Steelers, not even saying that they are looking at a center, just throwing out a random team, all of a sudden they may feel a little bit more encouraged and inclined to go out there and nab themselves a JC Tretter, or they can slow the roll a little bit, slow the dissemination of information within the rules and the wiggle room they have in the NFL and the CBA and all that stuff. and allow themselves to work out Robert Hainsey, Nick Leverett, who was seen also with a towel stuffed down his pants. So you know what that means. And it gives them some opportunities to see what's what before they go and determine if they need to sign a veteran. So I'm just, again, it's a conspiracy theory type of thing, right? But it's also, again, it's the reason, like, teams might know a player's out for week 6, before they even get home from the game they just got done playing, but they're not going to designate that player as out until they absolutely have to for these strategic advantages.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It's the gamesmanship, right? We could wake up, this morning as somebody is listening to this, or, tomorrow morning as somebody is watching this on YouTube, please subscribe. And we get the announcement that the Buccaneers have signed J.C. Tretter. And then we find out after practice on Tuesday, okay, yeah, Ryan Jensen, he's going to be out for the year. We've already signed JC. He's going to be here tomorrow to begin practicing and to officially sign his contract. So it may be a twofer that we get the Jensen news and a signing news in the same day. Now, if it's not JC Tretter that signs, there's not really a whole lot of options out there with starting experience or that are starting caliber. So if it's a lesser name, it could mean one of two things. Number one, they needed a little bit of extra depth because they feel that Jensen is going to be out probably pretty long term, maybe the whole year, and they have confidence that Hainsey can get the job done.
Absolutely. So good stuff out of Tom Brady coming out of camp. Good stuff apparently out of Robert Hainsey right now. Some of that could just be kind of talking the confidence up in a guy, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what leaders do sometimes. But more to come. Carlton Davis also said some words to some people who had questions and ears and recording devices. So we will take a look at those words and we will react to those in kind. And we're going to do something to our friends over at built.com, who have been selling Built Bar Puffs for a while now. James, one of my favorite items that I've ever ingested. If you haven't tried Built Bar Puffs yet, you are depriving yourself of one of life's greatest joys. And there is a new flavor, indulgent cookie dough covered in chocolate. Built has done it again. So let us introduce you to a new flavor. If you don't know about it yet, cookie dough chunk puffs have a light and chewy texture, real cookie dough chunks, and of course they're covered in 100% chocolate. So all the joys of eating cookie dough without the hassle of making it. Plus, it's healthy for you. Also, who makes cookie dough anymore? Don't you just go to the store and buy it in the things or whatever? And then if you want to eat it raw, you just eat it raw. Either way, if you want to try the cookie dough chunk puffs, go to built.com, snag a box for you and the family. It'll be the perfect treat, or you can find a really good hiding place and just hoard them all for yourself. Like all Built bars, the new cookie dough chunk puff is covered in 100% real chocolate, which means they're healthy and tasty. Chocolate covered cookie dough with light, fluffy texture. It's so good. So head over to built.com today. Use the promo code LOCK15. You'll get 15% off of that order. Again, this promo code LOCK15 at built.com. Thanks once again for making the Locked On Bucs podcast first listen or your first view every single day. Number one corner, number 24 in your programs, number one in your hearts. Carlton Davis III spoke to the media following practice, and it turns out that Carlton Davis has some confidence, James. I don't know if you're aware of that beforehand, but
I am indeed aware of the confidence level. Let's be honest. If you were going to be a corner, it doesn't matter if you are in peewees or middle school or high school or college, or you are in a grown man, 35 to 45 year old flag football league. If you're going to be a corner, you got to have some swag and you got to have some ego. And you basically have to believe that you are hands down the best athlete on the field at all times.
Absolutely. You also need some skill if you're going to be successful. I remember playing intramural flag football, and there was a young gentleman who looked like Under Armour threw up all over him playing cornerback for a team that we were playing against, and he proceeded to get torched in all of his Under Armour apparel over and over and over again. Anyway, Carlton Davis doesn't do that. He is an NFL cornerback, so he only gets torched on occasion. But he expects a lot from himself this year and from the rest of the defense. Davis told media on Monday that he wants to be looked at as one of the top guys in the league at corner, saying, quote, "I want to be the premier corner in the league. I want to be the most feared corner. I want to lead the league in pass breakups, interceptions, and I want every NFL team to know I'm going to hit you, end quote. He also says that the defense wants, quote, 30 plus takeaways this season. So here's my reaction, James. It's literally impossible to lead the league in pass breakups and interceptions and to have every team know that he's going to hit them, but also be the most feared corner in the league. Because if he's the most feared, what's going to happen?
He's not going to get targeted.
They're going to avoid him. Therefore, he can't lead the league. But I love the energy. I love the thought process. I love the spirit of it. So I'm all about it.
I would enjoy seeing him lead the league in one of those categories, let alone, be the guy that breaks up all the passes, catches all the interceptions, and hits all of the players. Just shut down the opposing receiver. That's all I ask. If you're going up against Michael Thomas, shut him down. 2 catches for 11 yards because he only runs slants, no touchdowns. If you're going up against Jamar Chase, maybe don't give up a 50-yard touchdown bomb because Jamar Chase can do that. If you're facing Cooper Kupp, maybe don't let him get a 45-yard catch and run to set up a game-winning field goal. That's it. That's all I want. Carlton Davis got paid handsomely, and he took less to be on this team than he probably would have gotten on the open market because he wanted to come back to Tampa, wanted to play with Tom Brady again, wanted the chance to chase a ring. That's exactly what they're doing. And look, 30 plus takeaways on the year, you're averaging almost 2 a game at that point. If they get 30 takeaways this season, they're just running roughshod through everyone to win the Super Bowl because that's an unstoppable defense. They'll dominate.
Absolutely. Carlton Davis, by the way, already one of the fewest targeted corners, the least targeted corners. I think that's the way to put it. One of the least targeted corners in the National Football League last year among cornerbacks. Okay. Among cornerbacks that had 530 or more coverage snaps, because that's how many Carlton Davis had, was 530. So of all NFL corners that had at least that much, if not more, most of them more, Carlton Davis, seventh fewest amount of targets. I cannot English today. 7th fewest amount of targets with 69 of them. Somewhere Rob Gronkowski just smiled and he had no idea why. But here's the thing about that, right? So 69 targets, 11 passes broken up. That's a very good ratio, I think, right? The league leader in the same group, right? Same amount of coverage snaps or more was Marshawn Lattimore. Yes, Saints fan, we see you. You're all very happy. I got it. But he was also targeted 94 times. So he was targeted almost 30 more times than Carlton Davis was to get 7 more PBUs. So as far as I'm concerned, that means that Carlton Davis statistically, right, probably did a little bit better because quarterbacks obviously not as afraid of Marshawn Lattimore as they are of Carlton Davis.
Here's the thing about the times that Carlton Davis was targeted. And I could be wrong, but this is the first thing that popped into my mind.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an opposing quarterback going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, are you going to target Carlton Davis? Or are you going to target, I don't know, D. Delaney or Ross Cockrell or Pierre Desir? Maybe the targets were more circumstance than teams actively trying to avoid Carlton Davis.
Still being avoided. Still being avoided. Just saying. Listen, of the same population, 55.1% reception rate is what Carlton Davis allowed. That is the 8th best among all cornerbacks in the National Football League with, again, 530 or more coverage reps. And also, how dare you? I'm complimenting Carlton Davis. How dare you come in and try to undercut my compliment of Carlton Davis III? I'm not trying
to poo-poo Carlton Davis. I'm just saying he was the only legitimate starting corner on the field. So obviously teams are going to create mismatches against practice squad players.
Who else did the Saints have? You're actually sitting here and you're hurting my cause about Carlton Davis being more feared than Marshawn Lattimore. Every Buccaneers fan watching this show right now, or viewing or listening to the show right now, should go to Twitter and tell you how terrible of a human being you are right now. So let's look at this. So the Saints cornerback with the next highest amount of targets after Marshawn Lattimore. You're making me do this, by the way. Paulson Adebo, who had 80 of them. So Paulson Adebo is a very good young cornerback, by the way. So I don't know if that helps me or hurts me, to be honest with you. Jamel Dean had 82. So Jamel Dean targeted more than Paulson Adebo. Carlton Davis targeted fewer times than Marshawn Lattimore. Equals Marshawn Lattimore is less feared than Carlton Davis.
Probably because really, I mean, Marshawn Lattimore is only at his best when he plays Mike Evans. If he played against the rest of the NFL, the way he hypes himself up and gets himself ready to play against Mike Evans, he would be a first ballot Hall of Famer.
I don't know what is happening to this show today because you are like locked and loaded defending this Buckeye corner who plays for the New Orleans Saints. And I am actually trying to tear down this argument, despite the fact that I'm a born and bred Buckeye fan. I think we just need to move to the next quote at this point. We've probably lost so many subscribers off of this one episode alone because of this portion of this segment. I think it's just best that we just move on.
You know, there are certain rivalries in the NFL that bring out the best in people. The Lattimore Evans rivalry brings out the best in Lattimore. I'm not saying Evans doesn't get his, but
no, I know.
Lattimore plays really, really well against Evans. Maybe not so much against the rest of the league. Just like
I count 5 compliments that James Yarcho just dropped about a Saints player or team in the segment alone. That's a record. Like
Mike Evans constantly and consistently gets the best of Jalen Ramsey, who I think is unquestionably the best corner in the league. It just happens. Anyway,
I don't know what's happening today.
I don't either. You did this. You wanted to bring in stats. I wanted to play devil's advocate, and all of a sudden we ended up down a rabbit hole. Carlton Davis was talking about another guy who used to get the best of the Buccaneers corners all the time, but now he's helping the Buccaneers. And of course, I'm talking about Julio Jones. Carlton Davis said, quote, "He's still the same guy, still a freak, huge, looks like a tight end, runs like Scotty Miller, stops on a dime like Jalen Darden. So it's like the whole package. He's bringing back memories of playing him in Atlanta before he was hurt. It was a tough matchup, but having him on our team, being able to compete with him, going to war with him for this upcoming season, it's exciting for me. I always love a good competition in practice, and that gets me ready for the season. So adding him to the mix on top of the talent we already had is just amazing. It's fun. It's fun to come to practice and go against 3 or 4 Hall of Famers every day, and knowing that if you can win here, you can win anywhere." End quote. And David, this is an aspect of Julio Jones that we've talked about. This defense in practice every day has to face Mike Evans, Julio Jones, Russell Gage, Tom Brady, Chris Godwin, Leonard Fournette. Iron sharpens iron, right? That's one of your favorite sayings.
Yeah.
Make the defense better. And it's going to create opportunities for the Buccaneers to prepare for teams like the Los Angeles Rams, like the Cincinnati Bengals. You take a look at that trio of receivers in Cincinnati: Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd. They've added Hayden Hurst as a tight end. Defenses are going to have to prepare for the Buccaneers in a similar way that they have to prepare for teams with a multitude of weapons like the Bengals, like the Rams, like the New Orleans Saints, like the Kansas City Chiefs. So adding Julio to the mix gives the Buccaneers defense even more to work with, because they don't just have those 3 top level caliber starting wide receivers. Now they have 4, and you mix in the tight end. There's nothing that the Buccaneers defense won't see in practice that they'll see in a game during the season, because they will face maxed out offense every snap, every day.
Absolutely. I'm just amazed at how many compliments you're paying to the New Orleans Saints in this episode. I can't get past it. I mean, listen, I'm usually the one who actually has to clarify on this show that, by the way, the Saints are a pretty good team, actually. And then I usually get some fan hatred, some Bucs fans hating me for it. So it's amazing to me. But listen, but you're 100% correct. And I got to be honest with you, actually putting into perspective of hearing who this Buccaneers defense has to go against every week. It's amazing they have any confidence. Actually, right. I'm surprised they don't all just retire and say, you know what, we're just not good at football apparently. But you're right. Iron does sharpen iron, and in the NFL, iron is represented by plastic, by pads, and the sound of iron clanking against each other is actually the sound of pads crashing into each other. And that sound is back in Tampa, Florida, because pads are on in week 2 of training camp. And we are going to talk about our expectations, what we expect to see or want to see now that the pads are on, right here on the Locked On Bucs podcast.
Wrapping things up here on the apparently James can't say any complimentary things about the New Orleans Saints podcast. David.
It's not that you can't, it's that you never do. We've been doing this podcast specifically for what, 5 years now? We've been doing a podcast together for like 6 years total. And we've been working together for like 7 or 8 years. And I can count on one hand how many times you've complimented the New Orleans Saints until today.
That's not
and
true.
We're at least at half a dozen today.
That's not true. I give credit where credit is due, and I'll compliment the Saints. I just bash them way more than I compliment them.
Maybe that's what's missing is the dose of hatred that usually comes out as well. So I'm just saying.
Asked on a national show on Sunday if the Bucs already have the NFC South locked up, or if any of the other teams can legitimately compete with them to win the division. And I said, absolutely, New Orleans can do it. They're a good football team. We'll just wait and see what Jameis they get on Sundays and what happens with Alvin Kamara and if Chris Olave translates to the receiver that we thought he was. But pads are back on in Tampa at the Advent Health Training Center, as well as across the NFL, because the Bucs, the NFL, they are back in pads for the first time this training camp. Things didn't exactly go great for the offense for the Buccaneers in drills on Monday. They had some issues. They were running a 2-minute drill, and Brady had to blow a timeout because the offense couldn't get set. They couldn't figure out what it was that they were doing. He was not a happy camper about it. But, David, what is something that you're looking forward to now that the pads are back and we inch our way closer to actual football?
It's Jalen Darden. And, if I could expand it, it would be Jalen and Tyler, because both guys have been getting a lot of praise. And not that I don't, want to hear praise about any of these guys. It's just that Jalen Darden, more specifically, again, not, he's not like full blown Kenny Bell at this point, but there are questions about, can he contribute to the offense, right? You're not going to get a whole lot of special teams out of him. I mean, these guys aren't going to go full speed punt and kickoff returns against each other in practice. It's just not going to be a thing. So we're going to have to wait really for the preseason to see that. And a lot of times, I remember it was a few years back during the preseason, really wanted to see some returns in the preseason for the exact same reason we're talking about this offseason. And the opposing coach is basically like, yeah, we don't really want to get any injured in punt coverage and kick coverage. So we'll just kick everything out of the back of the end zone or out of the sideline. Doesn't really help you there, right? But special teams coordinators, they're evaluating their guys based off vision, based off film, watch, all that stuff. Really, the question is, does Jalen Darden provide anything for the offense, or he's the only a special teams contributor? You're not really, he can make all the great catches he wants in the world. I know there was a tweet by a Bucs Nation writer about a really nice catch Jalen Darden had on Monday. Those are all great. But until the pads are on, until the hitting is possible, until the contact is real, none of it really truly matters, because that's when you really see if these guys are going to contribute to the offense. Tyler Johnson, we already know he can, right, contribute to the offense. Yeah. It's more so, is he really as fit, really as advanced as they say he is this year compared to this time last year? If he is, fantastic. Really no return game potential there that I'm aware of, right? So that's pretty much already a done deal. But Jalen, there are questions, and there are questions that have to be answered now the pads are on. So that is one of the biggest things I think the Bucs have to look for in this phase.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And that was something we talked about the wide receivers, on a previous podcast, and all the praise that they were getting and all of the hype they were getting from teammates and coaches and everything. And you were like, well, let's see what happens when the pads come on, because right now they're in shorts and t-shirts, and anybody can look good when you're in just shorts and t-shirts. Tell you what, David, what I'm going to be looking at, and something that I'm really, really going to focus on heavily when we are at the joint practices against the Dolphins coming up next week, is the interior of that line. I mentioned it in segment one with what Brady was saying about Hainsey, but you've replaced now Ryan Jensen, Ali Marpet, and Alex Kappa on this offensive line. We know that defenses love to pressure Tom Brady up the middle rather than on the edges. How is the interior of the offensive line holding up now that they are blocking for real, now that they are actually going pad to pad and having to withstand all these guys bum rushing the middle to try to get to Tom Brady? How do they look? What combinations are they leaning towards? Which guys are really starting to gel and mesh with one another? Is it going to be Hainsey in the middle with Stinney and Mason? Is it going to be Leverett with Mason and Gedeke? What is the combination going to be? I'm real interested to see how they approach it. Which guys are getting the most first team snaps? How often are they rotating? Or are we going to be in a situation now that by the end of the week, they kind of had a pretty solid idea as to which guys are going to continue to get those first team reps and begin to solidify what their starting line is going to look like this season?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't really tell anything about the trenches until the pads come on. So, that's it. It may seem like low hanging fruit to some people, but it's such a critical part of this game in today's NFL that it can't be understated enough, or it can't be overstated, I guess.
The Buccaneers are not going anywhere if they can't keep Tom Brady upright, and it is all about the interior of the line. It's such an underrated and overlooked, I want to say position, but we're talking about multiple positions, but really center is one of the most underrated and overlooked positions in the NFL, and the Bucs just lost an all-pro one for we don't know how long. It is so important that they figure this out and get it right, or it's going to be a very long and frustrating season for the Buccaneers. With that, David, we are going to get out of here. We would like to thank you all for listening to Locked On Bucs, making us your first listen of the day. Now make your second listen to Locked On NFL Podcast. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed in with the biggest stories and the latest news from around the league. I will be back tomorrow with my guy, Evan Koloski. We are going to have plenty of training camp discussion coming up for you then. If there's anything that you want to hear us discuss, that you want to ask us, topic ideas, anything like that, you, of course, can send in a voicemail at 813-444-5841 or send us an email to lockedonbuckspodcast@gmail.com. Check out David's work over at bucksgameday.com. Check out mine at bucksnation.com. And of course, follow along on Twitter at LockedOnBucs, at JYarcho_Bucks, and at DHarrison82. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire those cannons. And we thank you so much for joining us right here at Locked On Bucs.